Well, good day and welcome to what is the last in this series of webinars about faith long-term plans. And just to remind you that all of the webinars on the themes of the faith long-term plans are now available on our website and also on YouTube. And this is perhaps one that most people are a little bit surprised by at one level, the issue of media. But one of the problems that we have with the religion and environment world is that we're one of the best kept secrets, as many people say when they first come across the fact that for now over 30 years, more than 30 years, faiths have been very active indeed in the environmental world. So how can we improve our media presence? How can we communicate both within the faiths, but also to the wider world, the fact that actually the faiths are one of the most fascinating, one of the most diverse, and one of the most local as well as international movements that there is. So just a quick overview of the faith long-term plans. The faith long-term plans are, in a sense, an opportunity for us as faith communities to look at what we have, what we do, to be able to think about our assets, how we use them. We are major providers of education. Over 50% of education is provided by the faiths, a third of all medical facilities. We own a great deal of the land. We are an enormous purchaser of foodstuffs and energy and so forth. We can make a difference simply by what we do. And the first plan was launched back in 2009 in collaboration with UNEP and UNDP. And that led to a whole range of projects that over the last 10 years, 11 years, have been able to make a substantial difference in the way that the faiths work. They're ambitious and they're immensely pragmatic. This is not issuing statements about what other people should do. This is actually saying, what can we do with the assets, the resources, the influence, the knowledge, the history, the experience that we as faiths have? And this one is being developed in partnership with the UK government in relationship to COP26, but it is not exclusively at all about climate change. Climate change is a major issue, but it is one amongst many. If we take a look at Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical, which we'll be exploring later, you'll see that it's one of 6 areas that the Pope focuses on. And so we are working with the UK government. There will be an involvement. We will be announcing about a month before the November meeting in Glasgow on climate change, the range of faiths that are taking part. And we are anticipating that this could indeed touch about 1,000 different groups. But then it is also related, of course, to the SDGs and to the 2030 agenda. And we will be focusing very much next summer in June on the 50th anniversary of the first UN conference on the environment in Stockholm. And that's where the major details will come. So this is the rough timetable. I think many of you are familiar with this. And we are essentially now coming into preparation for the final year. How do we help you to develop plans that make real sense? To do this, we are bringing in a range of partners who will bring specialist information, specialist insights that can be made accessible to you. So many of you are interested in tree planting. So we're working very closely with the, I think it's Trillion Trees project, who can offer very specific advice, literally looking at the land that you're planning to perhaps plant on or create nurseries and help you choose the right kind of plants. And many other groups. And of course, our partnership with WWF is crucial to this. They are the largest environmental group in the world and have unrivaled resources and information. So from this session onwards, really, we're expecting that you're beginning to start to think about what your plans will look like. And we want to be here to help you. So if there are issues you want to explore, things that you're not certain about, be in touch with us. And then we can either help you directly or put you in touch with the groups that can. So just to remind you, the 7 areas, there is the use of assets. We as faiths often underestimate how influential, how powerful we are, what resources we have, and not just what resources we have, but that if we are faith consistent in the use of our resources, we then shape and influence our laity, the members of our faiths, in ways that probably multiplies our impact 5 to 10-fold. Then, of course, education. Not just the schools, the fact that we run 50% of schools, a third of all universities, but the fact that we also run some of the largest or involved with some of the largest youth organizations. We run Sunday schools, we run Torah Talmud classes, we run a whole range of educational establishments that give all faith children an opportunity. And we work with the Scouts and the Guides and other such bodies which are deliberately multi-faith. And that is a very powerful element of what we also bring, is that we are not doing this in isolation as Catholics or Anglicans or Muslims or Jews or whatever it is. We're doing this side by side, each of us bringing our own gifts to make a bigger story than would be the case otherwise. Media and advocacy, we do have a great power. There are a great many groups that are shaped and influenced by us, governments, international organizations, and just ordinary people, to put it mildly. Wisdom, we've been around a long time. We've learned a few things in our time. We have a wisdom about how to sustain change rather than just to force it. And that has been important. Lifestyles, of course, a fundamental element. We've come to the end of Ramadan with its fasting. All of our traditions have a sense that we need to look critically at how we use our resources, how we, in a sense, set a model and an example. Not that we don't celebrate and delight in what we've got. We'll come to that in a moment. And then we don't need to do this alone. We don't need to do this alone as faith groups. We have many, many different faith groups now who have signed up, many of whom have extraordinary stories to tell, examples, models, and very much the webinars have been designed to share those models. And you'll hear 3 absolutely fascinating, completely different models on media today. And then the final one, celebration. I often have to tease my environmental colleagues by saying to them, have you ever seen an environmental joke book? Have you ever seen an environmental songbook? The environmental movement has fallen, perhaps by accident, into a rather puritanical approach, one that doesn't actually think that humor is very important. In my experience of working with faiths all around the world and working with many different secular bodies, the ones that can find something humorous in what they do are the ones who actually understand the power of what they do. But also all of us as believers believe that this amazing planet, this wonderful diversity that we have, is a gift. And with gifts, you say thank you. And that means you celebrate. And so with that, I want to now hand over to my colleague Susie, who is head of communications for Faith Invest, and we're one of the 2 partners. She will then introduce our guests and guide this program. Just to remind you that all of these resources are available on our website, and we will be launching at the end of this month a whole new website called FaithPlans, which is explicitly designed to guide and assist this whole program, supported by, of course, WWF and by Faith Invest. I think I now can hand over to Susie, and thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you very much, Martin. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I've been working in communications one way or another for longer than I care to admit to. I was a journalist for 20 years before moving into working for charities. So I've seen it from both ends, as it were. And I firmly believe that communications is absolutely essential to the success of any initiative, any project. It certainly will be to the success of your faith plan, both in terms of making sure your own people, your own members of your faith community understand what you're doing, and the wider world as well. So we're talking about media and outreach. Originally, as I think Martin said, this was meant to be part of a webinar on media and advocacy. And we felt there was just so much to say on both. Both were equally important, so we split the 2. And we've certainly got 3 absolutely fascinating stories of action by 3 different faith communities using media in a very imaginative way. 3 very different stories, but very inspiring. As I mentioned, good communications are going to be critical to your success, and that's both communicating internally to your faith community, but also the wider world. This photograph here, which is a lovely one, is from the monks' community forest in Cambodia. And this story gained a lot of international attention when the monks began ordaining trees in the forest to protect them from loggers. Obviously, most of the loggers are from the Buddhist community. And it really helped. Getting this story out there really helped to raise the profile of what they were doing and get support not only from within their community, but outside it. There are masses of communication tools or outlets that you can use. Quite a confusing array these days. This photo is of Cardinal Turkson being interviewed by BBC Radio last year. And broadcast media, TV and radio, and print media, newspapers and magazines obviously belong to traditional media, but there's been a huge explosion in digital media in recent years, from websites to online streaming to Facebook to Twitter, a huge number of options. When you're thinking about how to get your message out there, don't forget about your own media outlets as well, your own internal media outlets. It used to be said that faith groups had more newspapers or journals than were in the entire European Union. I am quite sure when you add in all the various websites and radio stations and Facebook pages and Instagram feeds that they have these days, that is probably still true. They have more media outlets. So don't forget about your own internal media opportunities. And don't forget also about sermons. They are a weekly opportunity for faith leaders to address the faithful, and they are a fantastic opportunity for you to get your message across through them as a faith community, telling your faithful about your faith plans. This photo you can see here is of the launch of Dignity Day in 2019, which was all about promoting girls' education. And you can see in the middle there's a cameraman filming it. What you can't see is there's a whole load of photographers and cameras just outside this shot. And this is the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council is very good at using media to promote its message. They have very good relationships with local national TV and radio stations. There are Muslim radio stations and Muslim TV as well. And anytime the most important person there, this is the Mufti, is officiating, they get a lot of media coverage. So you want to get your message out. Well, how do you go about it? I would suggest there are a few things you need to think about when you're crafting your story. You need to come up with some interesting content. There should be an element of timeliness, you know, whether we're talking about something that has just happened or is happening or is about to happen. It's no good trying to get someone interested in something that happened 6 months ago. It's too late. So we could be talking about an event or an activity, a campaign. There needs to be some idea of novelty or a new or fresh angle. And I really encourage you to think about the visual elements. Nowadays, today's modern media is image hungry, whether that's for websites, whether that's for Twitter or Facebook, or as you can see here, this is a picture of EcoSeek's YouTube channel. EcoSeek is the Sikh community's leading environmental campaign, global environmental campaign, and they were founded as a result of the last long-term faith commitments program in 2009. And since then, they have got this, they've got a variety of outlets they use, but they really also use their YouTube channel very heavily, and they're constantly creating these small little videos about the various activities they're undertaking. Some of them are literally just as one of them here is literally 2 minutes long. Some of them are a little bit longer, and some of them only get a few hundred views, but some of them get, as you can see here, 73,000 views, 28,000 views. So they're a fantastic way for them to reach out to a community that is very spread across a sort of wide geography. And then finally, I would just say, it's important that you choose the right outlets for your audience. You should know your audience. Who is it that you are trying to target? If you are a rural faith community in a rural part of Africa where people don't have access to newspapers, they don't have access to TV very much, but maybe they have radios, that would be possibly the channel that you would choose. So really know your audience and know who it is you're trying to reach when you're planning your media campaign. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'm delighted to say that we have 3 fascinating speakers. We have Daniel Perel, who's the representative to the United Nations for the Baha'i International Community based in the United States. He'll be our first speaker. We then have Dr. Fakhrudin Mangoyunjaya, chairman of the Center for Islamic Studies at the National University in Indonesia. And we have Reba Elliott, who's Director of Special Projects and was recently Director of Communications for the Global Catholic Climate Movement. We'll start with Daniel, and I'll stop sharing now and welcome you, Daniel, to take over the screen.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you, Martin, and all for the opportunity to be here with you. Good day to everyone. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe provide a little bit more of a conceptual underpinning for at least the Baha'i approach to media, and maybe it'll be of some utility for those who are interested in how it can apply to your faith community. I often consider the media as a real double-edged sword. It reflects maybe too accurately or in an exaggerated fashion, both humanity's greatest advancements and some of its greatest struggles. So I'd like to offer just a few thoughts on three dimensions of communications in the media. The first is my understanding of a Baha'i approach to media in general. The second is on how the Baha'i world is learning to use tools of communication to share information within the community. I believe I was specifically asked to share some of this, so apologies if it's a little bit media adjacent. And then the third is how my office and then some national offices of the Baha'i community that are engaged in similar work use the media as tools to both advance human progress as well as to defend the rights of the Baha'i community when under threat. So first we'll start with the Baha'i approach to media. So the starting framing for all the activities of the Baha'i community is based on an orientation of service. So in this regard, the media is really an extension of or another way of advancing the development efforts of a community. It's drawn upon when appropriate to help inspire and raise consciousness about principles pertinent to the material and spiritual progress of that population. So an initial question that's often asked is, in terms of the media, is how can it be used to advance the well-being of our population? So a few quotes from the Baha'i writings, and interestingly, there are quotes from the holy texts of the Baha'i faith on the media. They help to support this kind of approach. The first one says, it is urgent that beneficial articles and books be written, clearly and definitely establishing what the present day requirements of the people are and what will conduce to the happiness and advancement of society. Another states that the publication of high thoughts is the dynamic power in the arteries of life. It is the very soul of the world. So then the role of the media is to contribute to societal harmony and stimulate thoughtful conversation on issues facing humanity, which then requires both accurate reporting and attractive stories to convey values conducive to humanity and hope. One could see it, as the Baha'i writings state, as the mirror of the world, reflecting the range of experience of diverse people. And then what's a mirror used for? It's to ensure that the subject in the mirror is able to find comfort and satisfaction in their appearance and to make modifications where there may be a deficiency. Clearly, you can see that my mirror is malfunctioning a little bit on the deficiency front. So many of the media usages that people may know from the Baha'i communities actually arise from the communities themselves. It's very organic to their needs and to how they try to meet those needs. So radio stations are one good example, which has already been raised, but they're not established in order to promote or spread the Baha'i faith or its activities, but rather as tools to allow communities to more easily communicate with one another, share information on a range of subjects that previously might have been limited. And for myself, actually, one of the first exposures I had to the Baha'i faith before I became a Baha'i was at a place called Radio Baha'i in southern Chile. And there was a gathering with a whole host of indigenous populations who came together to celebrate. Most of them weren't Baha'is, but they all listened to that radio station for community news and information and really expressed profound gratitude for the clear service orientation that was conveyed. And it had a really deep impression on me. It demonstrated that the actions of the Baha'is are genuinely in line with their principles of the oneness of humanity. And ironically, it was this service to non-Baha'is that most powerfully attracted me to the faith. From time to time, of course, there may be interfaith devotionals and other prayer gatherings that are broadcast. We saw this really accelerated during the pandemic recently in Uganda, the Philippines, the DRC, and elsewhere. But it's really not Baha'is for Baha'is. It's by communities for communities. And sometimes the Baha'is are able to make a helpful contribution. And as such, there really isn't a global systematic plan in place for the establishment of radio stations or anything along those lines. It's really locally driven out of a sense of service. And when it works in one place, it may be replicated in others. And one perhaps noteworthy element, just as an aside, is that a lot of the media response to COVID in support to the community was not through the creative use of Zoom calls or the modern technology, though that has happened, of course, but really radio and even simpler media like speaker systems. So there's a significant social good that can be advanced through thoughtful use of simple tech and not always thinking only in terms of providing and adopting cutting edge technologies. So secondly, I was asked to convey a few thoughts on how Baha'is share information as it may be relevant for communities who are trying to do so as well. So most informally, I guess, there's the Baha'i World News Service, which was established to share news stories about the worldwide Baha'i community with the goal of learning from the experiences gained as we work to advance the spiritual and material development of communities. I can provide a link in the chat after. And it also helps to convey information about things like the construction of houses of worship, the passing of certain significant figures and things of this nature. So it's much more the news service, as the name implies. There's a more in-depth analysis as well, which is called the Baha'i World. And this publication was established to provide more long-form record of worldwide Baha'i activity. And Susie mentioned that if it's 6 months old, it's too old. For this sort of slow news periodical, I would say if it's 6 months old, it's maybe too new. So the Baha'i World online publication presents a collection of essays and articles that explore themes of relevance to the progress and well-being of humanity, highlighting advancement in the community at levels of thought and action, and really reflecting on the history of the faith. So it's a much slower approach, but maybe more in-depth. But Dan, I hear you saying, that's all well and good, but how do Baha'is know what to prioritize in their activities, especially as I hear the Baha'i faith has no clergy? That's a good question, I say. Thank you for asking. So the Baha'i community is perhaps the most loyal readership you could imagine when it comes to receiving annual and occasional messages from the Universal House of Justice, which is our worldwide governing body, and then the messages conveyed every 19 days from national and local spiritual assemblies. So Baha'i communities gather every 19 days, roughly 3 weeks, to read these letters and discuss the application of the guidance and reflections therein to their locality. At the global level, we have various principles, a framework, if you will, that constitutes a foundation for messages and consultations further down the subsidiary chain. So the foundational elements are all similar, but there are diverse approaches. So how these institutions, the House of Justice, the national and local assemblies, how they know what to say is really driven by the information that's gathered and knowledge shared from designated individuals and committees at all levels who see what's happening and share it with the institutions. So there's this really cyclical nature of information gathering, comprehension, analysis, learning, reflection, publication, and then again. And that analysis helps the community to understand in what direction to go. And finally, it may be helpful to mention that there has been a real uptick in our use of film, as was mentioned earlier, both feature film length as well as 3-minute film versions of otherwise written stories. So if you look at the Baha'i World News Service, you'll see there's a written story. And then if you click, there's almost always a 2 to 3 minute video that conveys essentially the same information, but using pictures rather than just words. And it's very effective. And it allows us to show rather than just tell. So then how Baha'is engage with external media? So there are offices of external affairs, which is sort of the national level of what I do at the United Nations. And as they're being established, they generally have someone who's tasked with working on media, and they look at it across 3 dimensions: the website, media relationships, and then defense of the Baha'is. So how the community's presence is displayed on websites actually has 2 benefits. One is, of course, the obvious. We can show people who we are. But the deeper one is perhaps understanding ourselves understanding who we are and what it is that we want to articulate to our audience. And so it starts with really profound conversations on this, so that what is being shared is actually consistent with what we want people to see. And to use a food analogy, it's like a whole bunch of different ice creams. So the ice cream is ice cream. It's creamy, it's cold, it's sweet. That's true of all ice cream, but there are many different flavors that can be used. And so each national community maybe has a different flavor, but it's built on the same principles of ice cream, so to speak. So secondly, there's developing relationships with elements of the media interested in advancing human well-being. And this is a really important dimension because we found that, us publicizing our own activities has a limited audience, and it's mostly ourselves. But as we develop these relationships with others, we can work with them to tell their stories in a way that maybe is a little bit more constructive. And perhaps from time to time, they can help tell some of our stories, but that's ancillary. And in this way, we can actually help shape media to be more of a service orientation. So in some instances, they've been hosting, national communities have been hosting roundtable discussions with journalists on how the media can be a source of hope for society. In others, it's about social cohesion. And in others, it's to overcome division and polarization in response to crises. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about defending the rights of the Baha'i communities under threat, because if you've seen mainstream media talking about the Baha'is, it's usually in this context. And this is actually the only area of media engagement where my office actually has a very strong role in the work of national offices, which is actually logical, because our first goal is to understand the desires of the community we're defending, and we work for them. And so the last thing we would want to do is publicize something that could put them in danger. So there's a direct line of communication, not direct, but there are lines of communication to those communities so that we can ensure that we're not saying anything that would put them at risk. And then the second principle that we use is that we want to work with governments and others behind the scenes before going public to demonstrate trustworthiness and give those governments the opportunity to be just in their application of the law. If the injustice continues, then we would have to go public, and then we draw on media connections and make short videos and all kinds of things that are much more traditional. So that's maybe a brief overview. I apologize if I went a little bit long, but it's a wide-ranging topic. And as mentioned earlier, it's actually been very helpful to try and organize a few thoughts about this into a talk. And I'm really happy to answer further questions if you have any, and I look forward to learning from the other speakers. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I particularly loved your telling of the sort of cyclical nature of information gathering, learning and discussion that the Baha'i community engages in every 3 weeks or so, because it must make for a community that's very well informed about what the wider Baha'i community is doing, which is very, very powerful. I'm going to move on now to Dr. Fakhruddin Mangunjaya. He's actually with us, but he pre-recorded his presentation in case the internet connection was dodgy. So we're going to play the video of his presentation, and then he'll be with us for questions afterwards.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fakhruddin Mangunjaya, Chairman Center for Islamic Studies, National University in Jakarta, Indonesia. Allow me to share to you some of experience that related to the use of media in publishing of wildlife conservation fatwas in Indonesia. This is a part of the dissemination of fatwas. As you might understand that in 2014, there was a huge acceptance and surprise, because the Islamic Council of Ulama, or Indonesian Council of Ulama, was published the fatwas regarding wildlife conservation. Perhaps you might not familiar with the word of fatwas. Fatwa is an Islamic edict, we call. Fatwa is really, by definition, is a non-binding in secular law, but it is binding in religious, in faith, particularly Islam, in providing interpretation and teaching regarding the issue of anything related to the best practices or guidelines or the teaching of Islam, issued by Islamic jurists or mufti. Mufti itself is an ulama, an Islamic scholar who has very good in Islamic teaching and knowledge. This is an example of the Islamic jurisprudence related with the Islamic tradition, with the Islamic teaching in the 14th, 15th, 17th centuries sometime. And the juries wrote regarding the fatwa is on fiqh, on their interpretation of how Islam might be practiced in the daily life, in the interpretation of jurist perspective. This is some example that related to the Islamic fiqh. For example, this kitab Sabil al-Muhtadin was published in 17th centuries, and it have influenced the Islamic practice and life in Southeast Asia particularly. So by accepting fatwa, it's mean that you have a certainty of how your teaching, how your Islamic teaching guides to the aspect that you are asking. So by the popular understanding, the fatwa is something related to the supervisions of the ulama regarding their perspective on the Islamic teaching. That is why fatwa usually being asked by the lay people, by the society, by non-governmental organization, by government to the ulama. In this case, in 2014, before that, 1 year before that, we are pursued for the ulama to answer our question regarding the protection of the animal, particularly the importance of protection of the tigers. But then the ulama asking, why you ask for fatwa? We say this is very important because the population is decreasing and the animal might be extinct in the future. So we asking the fatwa. We predict that fatwa can be a help for supervising the Muslim community in close to the forest area to have a guidelines by Islamic perspective of how they taking action, for example, for protection of the animal with the Islamic perspective. That is why we asking the fatwa and we wrote a letter. We signed together 2 NGOs that time and 1 university from the Center for Islamic Studies, myself, and 1 from government, from the Director of Conservation of Ministry of Environmental and Forestry. We asked the Fatwa Commission, and the Fatwa Commission accepted. And by process, we have a dialogue meeting in Indonesia. And they have a Fatwa Commission. It is member about 10 to 15 people, scholars. And they make a ad hoc group that is kind of a drafting team for verification of why there should be a fatwa for that kind of protection of the animal. And they ad hoc study intensively for the substantial problem. Secondly, they make an assessment paper. And thirdly, if needed, commission also can invite the expert for the assessment. At that time, we most facilitate about 6 months in facilitating the dialogues between the conservationists, the expert, bring them to the Indonesian Council of Ulama to present something regarding the importance of protecting the wildlife, regarding the balance of the ecosystem. So by that, the consideration after separate meeting, the big commission plenary meeting, and then they release fatwa. So this is one of the ad hoc team from the Indonesian Council of Ulama, or MUI. They are visiting Tesso Nilo National Park, the most new national park, and there are also several experience related to the human and wildlife conflict. And they ask people why, how, and where, and when regarding the animal conflict. So then in 2014, there was a release, the Biodiversity Fatwa we call. Its title is quite long. It's titled Fatwa for the Conservation of Endangered Animals for the Balance of the Ecosystem, number 4, 2014. One of the important clauses is they are suggesting the fatwa that killing, harming, assaulting, and hunting or engaging in other activity with threatened endangered species with extinction are forbidden. Forbidden in Islamic terminology is haram. If you doing haram, it's mean you make a sin. So hunting, etc., assaulting, harming, and killing the endangered species with extinction are haram, except for cases allowed under Sharia, such as self-defense. And also illegal hunting and illegal trading of endangered species also haram, unlawful. So this clause is so meaningful for the Muslim to understand their certainty about illegal hunting is haram, not only by law, by secular law, by government law, they are prohibited, but Islamically and according to Islamic teaching, they are haram. The next step we have to disseminate. After this fatwa being released, we announced on the television and mass media, because we are also very close with many networks and partners, particularly WWF and also the government of Indonesia. We have also Fauna and Flora International. Of course, we make press release. We make a press gathering at the MUI office. And secondly, we have also the Ministry of Environment to announce this nationally by inviting so many people, maybe about 200, 300 people at the time at the zoo. Announced the fatwa by the head of Majlis Ulama Indonesia, by the chairman of Majlis Ulama Indonesia, and also was present the Ministry of Environment at that time. It was in September 2013, 2014, and then we also have many surprise media coverage. And if you Google it now, the wildlife fatwa is the only wildlife fatwa in the world for the first time. So we can find like 289,000 results on wildlife fatwa regarding that. We have big coverage on Bahasa Indonesia as well many in English. So this kind I found like humor. It is a surprise. They say, "Whoa, Indonesia is such an addict against killing endangered wildlife. How much is the airfare to Jakarta?" So there's an intention of surprise from many conservationists as well about the optimism of how this fatwa being disseminated. This is an illustration, including with National Geographic, we covered by Jakarta Post, Guardian, Times, and many coverage from national and international media. But of course, we also have long-term plan to disseminate that to the local. This is the most important thing, because if we just announce that nationally and not disseminate to the local, it might not the focus or the community that related to wildlife might not heard anything regarding the fatwa. So that's why we also make this kind of tools. We create posters, we create guidebooks, and also we provide as a detail of the fatwa. We create khutbah. Khutbah is ceremony that may be disseminated during the Friday prayer. So we print this and we put that on the internet. We also published that several thousand to disseminate for several provinces, particularly in Java, in Sumatra, and in Kalimantan. So the fatwa regarding the environment in Indonesia is not the first actually, but for the protection of wildlife is the first, but there are before fatwa regarding population health and development in 1983, 2010, there's recycling water for ablution and environmental friendly mining in 2011. There's also a fatwa in 2016 regarding the law of burning land and forest. So we are not stopped by only disseminating on the national level, the international level. We also would like all the community heard about this. So one of the focus, we are trained the imam. So up to now, we have trained up to 900 now, village leaders and elders, and more than 220 conservation sites in Sumatra, Kalimantan, Terengganu. So we train in Kano, in Nigeria, as far as Malaysia as well. So we disseminate that very, very importantly, not only by visiting and train the imam at the field, but also we put that information in the website. We create the WhatsApp group. We create about 10 WhatsApp group, contain with the group of imam. And we also set social media. And also we try to bridging between the clerics and the governments and NGOs. We also are doing a research and academic study in order to evaluate the result. And we have established also some of the cleric group, about 30 members of the clerics. They can independently go to the remote area, engage with the community, disseminate of the fatwa. They have also some Instagram here. You can take it. You can have a look later on. They have also Instagram, Facebook page. And from UNAS, we have Facebook page, we have YouTube, we have, of course, the free books that you can download for the use of the teaching of Islam and environment. That's all. Thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing in this webinar. If you have a question, let us discuss together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fakhruddin. I thought that was absolutely fascinating and a really good example of an initiative that used practically, I think, every form of media and outreach that could be used, from the traditional media with the press releases and the press conferences, using also with the government support and getting all that massive international coverage, to contemporary digital media, setting up WhatsApp groups, using Facebook, using Instagram, obviously websites. I think you've practically used it all. And I think the other really important learning to take away from this was how, as you said, it's no good just promoting what you're doing to maybe a national or international audience if your target group, which is the communities living alongside the wildlife, don't know about it. Then your initiative will fail. And the way you have built into your program is as a whole program of reaching out to those people, delivering training to the faith leaders, providing them with the information they need in whatever format is best suited for them. I think that is really inspiring. And by the way, last time I looked at Google, i.e. yesterday, and you put in illegal wildlife fatwa, you now come up with 1.1 million results. So way beyond the 279,000, I think you mentioned. So congratulations. And Fakhruddin is here and he will be available for questions at the end of the webinar. But in the meantime, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Reba Elliott, who is the Director of Special Projects with the Global Catholic Climate Movement. This is another really inspiring example of a movement that is using very sophisticated and effective techniques to get their message out to a global audience. So welcome, Reba, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you very much to the other speakers. Those were really inspiring presentations, and I'm sort of wishing I didn't come last. Those were really, really great things to see. So I would like to share a little bit, maybe perspective from Global Catholic Climate Movement. Best practices. What are some ways that we have found it helpful to communicate in a really kind of detail-oriented way? Hopefully this is helpful for everyone, and happy, of course, to answer questions. So maybe just to begin, one of the things that we have found most helpful at Global Catholic Climate Movement is that telling our story, telling the story of the things that we're doing and that we found exciting, is a way of inspiring others to take action. So Global Catholic Climate Movement has a global presence. We're in 100 and some countries. We work with grassroots leaders and with grass tops leaders in the Catholic Church. And we always want them to do something, whether it's signing a petition or holding an event or just praying and reflecting and speaking with the people around them. We always want them to take some kind of action. So I have here this little example of one of the blog posts that we publish at the end of each year, just because it's a really concrete way that we tell the story of what we're excited about as a way of getting others to get excited. But I'm going to talk about a few of the communications channels that we use specifically and the kind of nuts and bolts of how we use these channels to inspire others. So first, in social media, I've put here a few examples of social media posts. We run our communications in at least 4 languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian, and often in additional languages as well. So I have a post here on the left in English and a post on the right in Spanish. We usually have a calendar of social media. So we plan in advance what we want to publish. We create all of the images, we get all the links together so that we can have that content ready, but we also work in a responsive way. You know, as Susie was saying, if something new happens, we want to be ready to kind of take advantage of that opportunity to start a conversation. So we have a process in place so that we're not kind of scrambling at the last minute. How are we going to respond to that? So having these systems, either the calendar or a responsive process, having those systems has been really helpful. And it's what allows us to have social media every day in 4 different languages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have a kind of central communications team, but we also give a lot of freedom and flexibility for the leaders in different places to make their own social media posts. I think Daniel was talking a little bit about that balance between the kind of central organization and then local leadership. So that balance has been really important for us as well. We have a big emphasis on images in social media, as Susie was saying. People we find will stop for the picture, but not for the text. The picture has to kind of draw them in. So whether it's just finding a great picture or actually getting a graphic designer to make an image, the image really, really kind of has to be primary for us. We find that social media is a great way to promote other assets that we've made for communications. So in this example on the right with that beautiful waterfall, that's a blog post. We did all the work of making the blog post, and so now we can use it somewhere else. So all of these channels kind of fit together in a nice way that makes sure that people can connect with us no matter where they are. Social media is also a great way to get the audience involved in the conversation. So on the left-hand side, this illustration of this monk who's praying, that came from a member of our network, a grassroots leader who just made this beautiful illustration. And so we asked to use it here. We've also started at this moment, we're in a kind of big global event called Laudato Si Week, when Catholics all around the world come together in this week-long celebration of prayer and action for the environment. We've started a campaign called Laudato Si Moment, inviting people to send photos of their experiences in nature. And the Vatican is kind of coordinating that with us, and will recognize the people whose photos really communicate love for each other and our common home. So those kind of interactive campaigns are also great on social media. We have found that a community manager is essential. So this is someone who can respond to comments, screen comments, take out the ones that are maybe not coming from a good spirit. That kind of one-on-one contact with our audience is so important on social media. So again, kind of the practical best practices, what we found to have social media success. For email, the picture is a little bit different. So GCCM, Global Catholic Climate Movement, we send an email every week or two to our audience. And we have a lot of people who want this space. A lot of members of our team want to take advantage of this long document that we can use to communicate with our audience. Social media is so quick and email is really long, and so everyone wants to use it. So again, we've found it really helpful to have systems and a process. We also have a calendar for email. We decide what emails we're going to send a month or two in advance, depending on what news we know is going to happen at the time. So this email is about Laudato Si Week, that big global campaign I was talking about. I'm sure that our communications team planned this email a month or two ago because they knew this was going to be the news right now. So having that process has been really, really helpful. We do a lot of testing. So we test the where in the email the links come. Are people more likely to click on the link at the beginning or the middle, at the end? We test the subject line. Are people more likely to open this email if we have one subject line versus another? We even test the time that we send the emails. Most kind of email programs will let you do that testing automatically. So what you're using will probably let you test if you're not already. It's really important, we find in emails, to have the tone of the organization, the voice of GCCM come through so clearly. Global Catholic Climate Movement is a spirit-led movement. We are not shy about our Catholic faith. At the same time, we are also not afraid to communicate the urgency of the planetary crisis. So we have to kind of have a really good understanding of our voice and our tone, especially because this is such a long document. We have a lot of space to talk to people, so we want to take advantage of it. And then finally for email, there's a big difference in countries how often they open emails. Italy opens something like 80% of the emails that we send. Brazil opens 5% or 20%. There's a big difference in national comfort with email. So just as maybe a word of caution that checking those open rates is really, really helpful. Then practically speaking, WhatsApp and Telegram. These are great tools. We have found these so helpful. Other countries might use things like Facebook Messenger is used instead of WhatsApp, or in the US, usually just kind of regular texting is used. But these tools that go straight to someone's phone, straight to a message that they're going to open right away, have been amazing. So I have here a WhatsApp message that was sent for that photography contest I was mentioning, Laudato Si moment. I should say Laudato Si is a document that Pope Francis wrote about 6 years ago. It encourages Catholics and all people of goodwill to protect the earth, which Pope Francis calls our common home, the home we share. So this is a WhatsApp message that's about this photography contest that we're managing together with the Vatican. And as you can see, the kind of message here is the person who sent this is asking for us to share the message with our groups. So it's not only kind of saying, please submit to this photo contest, it's saying, please ask other people to submit to this photo contest. This is a kind of group of groups, approach to WhatsApp. And I think I saw something about WhatsApp groups for imams who are responding to the fatwa. It's probably a very similar approach. I'll just mention that this kind of group of groups asking people to ask their friends to do something was used in Brazil in the run-up to the election of President Bolsonaro. President Bolsonaro's advisors used this group of groups scenario very effectively, and it led to his election, which in turn led to advanced destruction of the Amazon. So this technique is really, really powerful, and the challenge is to harness it for good. Managing the big volume of messages on WhatsApp can be really challenging, or Telegram or Facebook Messenger. Just personally, I get so many messages there. So having business accounts for these tools is really helpful because it can limit the amount of interaction that happens. Then finally, the last kind of communication channel to share about are blogs and podcasts. So these are tools that we use mostly to celebrate the work of our partners. So Global Catholic Climate Movement has a network of member organizations, about 800 member organizations. And they're always doing great stuff. All of our members and our partners, again, it's just so exciting, so inspiring, the work that they're doing. And we want to share those good stories with others. So here on the left is one of our blog posts from Brazil, which we've somehow ended up talking about quite a bit. This is a group in Brazil that was holding a national meeting, getting people together to talk about how the church will respond to the ecological crisis. So we had a blog post about that. On the right-hand side is an overview of our podcast. So if anyone is unfamiliar with podcasts, They're like radio programs on the internet. And again, we mostly use those to highlight the great work of partners with in-depth interviews. These tools are a little challenging because they take time. They take time to research and do interviews and write and record. But they're just such a wonderful way to share those personal stories that people really, really respond to. Outside, so all of the previous channels I've just talked about, they've all been ones that we control, that we own. You know, we own our social media, we own our email, our blog posts, our WhatsApp accounts. Those are all things that we manage. As so many people have said, there's also this great opportunity to speak outside of the channels we manage through news stories. So we sometimes call this strategic communications. These are pieces of communication that somehow build up to a larger strategy. The example of the Fatwa story in The Guardian and Time and in the Indonesian news, that helped change people's impression, people's understanding of their responsibility to care for wildlife. Changing that understanding that people have, changing the conversation that people have about their position, that can be such an amazing strength of this type of communication. Relationships with journalists are so important for this to happen. Global Catholic Climate Movement publishes these kind of stories each year, about 2,000 of them. And those relationships with journalists often begin with an email. Just an email. Hey, I've noticed that you write stories about religion, or I've noticed that you write stories about the environment. Would you like to get press releases from us? It's so easy to just research, you know, go on the website of the newspaper that you want to place a story in and just search for the word environment or search for the word religion, and you'll get a list of reporters. After you've found the people that you want to reach, writing the press release is the next key step. So I might think that this event here on the left, which was a tree planting in rural Kenya, you know, I might think that I'm really, really moved by those kids. I love it when children take action. I'm a mom. It makes me so happy. A reporter might not be that interested in that. A reporter might be more interested in how rural people in Kenya are taking power back from the cities, or something like that. So when we craft press releases, we try to think of what would interest a newspaper. Why would a newspaper want to publish this? And that's what we feature in the press release. Beyond kind of straight news stories, letters to the editor, and opinion pieces are great options. These don't exist in all countries, but the basic idea is that it's not just a story about what's happening, it's someone sharing his or her opinion about the news. So on the right-hand side, this was an instance of that opinion letter from one of our grassroots leaders in Kenya, who wrote this letter to a big newspaper in Canada because she wanted to promote divestment from fossil fuels. And she was supported with kind of talking points that we prepared, and we helped her to think about how to frame that letter. So those are all of the tips on channels that I'd like to share. I just wanted to leave with a few other outside resources that you might find helpful. So the first one is called climatevisuals.org. This is a collection of photos. Most of them are free that you can use if you're looking for a great image for social media. There are all kinds of great pictures here of, everyday people either being challenged by the climate crisis or taking action to overcome it. So that climatevisuals.org is so helpful. The other thing that I have found really helpful is Google Scholar. So Google Scholar is a collection of journal articles from scientists and social scientists. When I need a fact to put in a press release, or if I need a fact to put in a blog post, I will often go to Google Scholar because it has that information and I can be pretty sure that it's trustworthy. So I will stop there. I know that was a lot of information, but thank you again to Faith Invest and WWF for organizing this wonderful conversation.
Reba, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. You had no fear about being last at all. It was a wonderful combination of being both immensely informative and practical and very inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I loved your story of your latest, or one of your latest campaigns, the Laudato Si moments. You can just see how that will capture people's imagination. We've finished the speakers now, so I'd like to invite all the speakers to stay on, Reba, if you wouldn't mind, for questions, and turn your cameras on. And Fakrudin, you're here. Well, wonderful. Welcome. Thank you very much. So I think Pippa, you're going to let us know what questions have been in the Q&A. But I wonder if maybe I could just start with one, and it's to you, Reba. You've described this wonderful sort of this movement you've got with massive engagement around the world, and you're putting out an awful lot. But obviously, when you put out a lot, you get a lot back. And I wondered if you could just share your thoughts on maybe some of the challenges of dealing with success, which is the vast volume of responses you must get from people, whether it's responding to your Twitter posts or your whatever sort of communication you have with them. How do you manage that from a practical point of view?
That's a great question, Susie. It's a good problem to have. It's a good problem if people are overwhelming us with responses, but it is also a practical challenge. So one of the things that we have done is to, just practically speaking for us, it's really important that the people who respond to the public, for us, speak more than one language. Practically speaking, that means that we can have fewer people kind of on the job. We have a huge amount of volume of email, social media comments, and WhatsApp messages. It's been really helpful to identify volunteers who can help respond to that if appropriate. And if not, to make sure that the members of our staff team are trained across those areas. So we have people who are really and truly not on the communications team, who are somehow responding to social media comments, or who are responding to our email address. Getting that good cooperation between staff people, especially during very busy times, and then making sure that all of them can respond in all of the languages we use has been really helpful.
Thank you. So,
I think Martin may have a couple of questions to start, and then I think we'll have about 10 minutes. We've had some through on the Q&A and some sent through directly, so we'll see how many we can get through. But I'll pass over to Martin first of all.
Thank you, Pippa. I wanted to really throw a question at all three of you, because in your presentation, Reba, you talked about, in a sense, the success of a social media campaign that ended up with a very bad result, i.e. Bolsonaro. And Daniel, you talked about trying to reach out to the media in terms of shaping the media to be hopeful. In fact, Rudin, you've talked about this too. How do you get the message out? how do you deal with the negative material that often comes back? What is your process for screening? Because sadly, not everybody takes the message you're saying the way you want it to be taken. Not everybody wants to be nice to you. And in fact, social media, as we know, has become a very destructive force as well as a positive one. I'm just wondering, I mean, Fakhruddin, what's your experience? And then Daniel, and then come to Reba. Just how do you deal with the fact that the media or the social media has become a very aggressive, divisive structure? Fakhruddin.
Thank you, Martin. This is first experience for us to get in with the social media actually, and just maybe last year we starting with Facebook by boosting the fatwas, even though the fatwas was previously boost in 2014, 2000 up to 2017 was very positive. But we had experience because social media can be negative if you have a kind of political opposition to um, the because they have a media buzzer. The buzzer, they have a group or something that negative that might not feeling responsive for the anything that they don't like. I just we feel it is positive and negative of the social media. Because of that, we are in the open public um, medium platform. Whatever people will see, the negative will be, you know, becoming less, and the positive one will become more positive if we are doing the things persistently. And we have to show that our work is positive things for moral, for ethical, for the thing that we are what we are doing for the better planet. So forget the negative thing that's always here in this in this little community of the planet, but we have to do an optimistic.
Okay.
However, the buzzer sometimes, you know, make you, you know, disappointed as well. We can erase that, but
That's a very good positive message, Fakhruddin. I'm just wondering, Daniel, very quickly, what's been your experience? Because I know there are groups that actually target you.
Yes, I'll start just by agreeing with what Fakhruddin said about maintaining that positivity. We know that this change has to happen, and you know, in order for change to take place, you're going to be swimming upstream. So just know that you're going to get this. It's part of the reality, and in some sense, if you're not getting it, maybe you're not swimming upstream hard enough. But that all said, one thing we've done is we've actually created a response to common allegations kind of sheet, so that everybody who's in our office and in our network understands what the common allegations are that are made against the Baha'is or some of the efforts that we're taking. And then we have kind of approved responses that we can make prepared. Another is just to discard it. If it comes from some, you know, crazy individual, whoever they may be, it could be somebody like me, then it's best just to sort of let that thing go. If it's from an institution, then we may take it up with human rights advocates or the United Nations itself, because there's a lot of negative use of the media by certain governments that are hostile to a community. And that has to be, that's, you know, against international law, that has to be raised. And then finally, we really have to determine kind of the comments that we allow on our various platforms. So do we allow Facebook comments? Do we allow a conversation space on our website? These are questions that we constantly are consulting upon. There's no fixed answer. We know that these things evolve, they ebb and flow, and we try to be reactive as best we can.
Great. And Reba, you talked about there being a community manager for screening. How have you established the criteria for screening? Because this is a controversial area in itself.
Yeah. I think if it makes the community manager uncomfortable, I think it's a pretty, I think that most of us can read something and know whether it's in a good spirit or not. We can have good spirited disagreements, but we can also tell when something is coming from a not so positive place. So that's been a really simple litmus test for us.
Okay, and have you developed, as Daniel suggested, this sort of how to deal with common accusations sort of response that, in a sense, sets out the data and the truth from your side, or have you not gone down that path yet?
We haven't, but I'm wishing now that we had. It's a fantastic idea, Daniel. We have a set of kind of positive talking points. So we know what our values and our principles are. We know the kind of language that we want to use. But I think it's a great idea to have like how to respond to common accusations.
Excellent. Well, that's exactly why we do webinars. Back to you, Pepper, to share ideas.
Yes, we have a question. Actually, it's a 2 to 3 part question. Reba, you touched on monitoring emails and kind of click rates and open rates. And so there's a question, how do you best monitor or track the effectiveness of what you're putting out there? Does it lead you to therefore know where to put most energy? And then the second part of the question is, would you say that social media could be more effective than the traditional methods at getting information out there?
I will answer the second part first because it's the easier one. I would say whether social media is more effective depends on your audience. Going back to what Susie was saying, if your audience is on social media, yes. If they are not, then no. As far as how we measure success, I'm not sure what Daniel and Fakrudin, kind of think about this. For us, we generally identify something that we are trying to achieve. So we want people to sign up for campaign X. We want people to pray for issue Y. If our emails are successful in achieving that goal, then they're successful. And we can think about subject line and clinking links and things is all kind of building up to that bigger objective. But yeah, I'm not sure what Fakrudin and Daniel, what you guys think.
Who go first? Me? Okay. This is interesting question. In answering about monitoring and evaluation of the impact, we always making this academically. Actually, I bring my student because I'm coming from university. We measure the before and after impact. We measure in certain areas as well the impact. However, we cannot cover of at the national level. We only will cover the focus site that we are going to influence. If in social media, we can measure the interest of people to see the campaign or video by boosting it and by share. If they share it and like it, we can measure that how many likes and how many people see that the video that we announced for the media campaign about the fatwas. And also we monitor that with Google Scholar campaign, and we also do a qualitative and quantitative interview to the people who is involved with our program. So by that we can share that we are success on our implementation, or we are middle success, or we are success enough, or not success at all. So at the meantime, we still trying to disseminate the mission, particularly to empower or to enhance the understanding the Islamic community with the Islamic ethics for the environment, we train now 100 up to 1,000 clerics to understand about conservation and and conservation and Islamic ethics on environmental conservation. Thank you, Pipa.
Thank you. And Daniel, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
We engage in many of the same things that have been said before. The only maybe thing I'll add is that we also ensure that there's kind of a quarterly reflection. So every 3 months, we look back on our media endeavors and just look for trends. So yes, in the immediate, we look at it, but then every 3 months we get together and we try to see, you know, is this going up? Is this going down? Do we have too many stories on this issue, not enough on that issue? And we do kind of a more comprehensive analysis on a quarterly basis, which we found to be quite helpful in giving us a true north.
Thank you. There is a question in the Q&A from Hendra Mojana, who asks about selecting and differentiating the valid and real information from hoax information. I know we've heard a lot recently about fake news. I don't know if that's one that Fakhruddin, you may want to address first, and then maybe we'll come to you, Reba.
With the hoax and
yes, how we differentiate, Fakhruddin, between fake hoax news and what's real.
Yeah, we have to check. You know, sometimes we have to be put critical thinking. If you receive an information, you have to think it is true or not. You should check, and you can ask Google it. Google can help so many things that it is hoax or not. So you have to think critically in anything regarding the issues, the filming, the cutting of the videos, and something that really questioning for us. So the philosophers say, ignetu ergo sum. I am thinking, here I am. So you have to think what you
Thank you. I don't know if Daniel or Reba, you have anything to add there, but if not, I will pass back to Susie because I'm aware we have 1 minute left. No, I think back to you, Susie.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank our three speakers very much indeed for your contributions. 3 very different presentations, but each one of them really fascinating and offering different insights into this very big area of how we get our message out, how we communicate what we're trying to do, and ultimately, let's face it, how we change the world. So thank you very much to everyone who's spoken. That's Daniel Perel from the Baha'i International Community, Dr. Fakhruddin from Indonesia, from the university there, University National, and Reba Elliott, Director of Special Projects at the Global Catholic Climate Movement. Just to remind everyone, this video is being recorded. It will go up on our webinar catch-up page in the next day or so. It's also available on our Facebook page as well. So I know, Hamid, you've had a few problems with the sounds, but you'll be able to catch up and listen to the whole thing again. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you also to everyone who participated in the chat and in the Q&A as well. Goodbye.